Welcome, everyone. I'm Lee Martinson, Customer Success Manager here at Snap Projections, and today we'll be working on a sample projection for a couple. If you do have any questions during the session, please use the question window of the GoToWebinar control panel, and I'll try to keep watch and see if any questions come up and answer them as soon as I can. So next, if you do have questions in the future, if you're watching the recording of this session, you can always go to our webpage and take a look at our articles that we have and videos, past sessions, register for upcoming sessions, and I'll show you how to access this help site when we get started. So in today's session, we're going to be creating brand new projections for a sample couple. We'll review the scenario setup pages, planning pages, and the report. And I also would like to go over the new functionality for First Home Savings Account and also randomized scenarios. And if there's questions at the end, I'll be happy to answer them at that point or throughout, as I mentioned before. I'll come back later on, maybe to these slides, but First Home Savings Account, we have this now under the Scenario Setup Assets page, where you can enter in a First Home Savings Account and then also the details regarding that account, such as the opening age, how much there might be carry forward room for 2024, if they've made any previous contributions, and so on. Okay, so let's get started. I'll bring the login session here for Snap Projections over. And today we're going to be talking about a sample couple, and I also have a client questionnaire for this couple. So this client questionnaire I've filled out and I've attached it here to the webinar. If you're here, you can see it under the handout section. And if not, let's take a look right now at the sample information for this client. So let's make this larger, we can see it. So we have Monika and Eric Gibson. This is using our financial planning questionnaire that's also available on our website, and you can use it to gather information about your clients in the order that you're going to be entering it into the projections. So we have Monika and Eric. They would like to know how much money they can spend annually in retirement. Their goal is $78,000 per year, retiring at age 65, and they would like to also use a first home savings account to purchase their first home. We have employment income for both of them, defined benefit pension plan for Monika, and we're using the national average for their government benefits for CPP, and for OAS, we're going to use 100% of the maximum. They both have some RSP and FHSA accounts. They'll be purchasing this new home in 2030, and their debts at that time, they'll take out a mortgage for $450,000. Okay, so that's it basically for the questionnaire for this couple. So I can just minimize this and we'll move back to our clients here. So we've logged into Snap Projections. We can see our client list. And one thing I always like to point out here that sometimes people don't realize is that you can show all clients or not. So here we've just got a blank client list and you could search for clients using the last name. But today we're going to go ahead and enter a brand new client. So I use the new client. Along the left side, we have our scenario setup, and we're going to go through these pages to get the initial information entered for these clients. So I'm just going to follow along with the questionnaire that I have filled out and enter in the information. So she's born 1992, and her spouse as well, Eric, was born in 1992. I can use the arrows here at the bottom, or the buttons at the bottom. I can go next for the next page, or I can just select the different pages along the side. Things will be saved as I enter them. So we have a retirement age, 65. We're going to use the general inflation rate from the guidelines. Up here we can see the guidelines button, You can learn more about this by using the button here that's what is this? You could go to the projection assumption guidelines from FP Canada Standards Council. We'll update these each year, and then you can import them again using the guidelines button. So I've set up my defaults for this page, 2.1% inflation. And in this case, I'm going to reduce these guidelines by fees that are expected. So in this case, I'll use 1, 2, and 5 for the rates of return. And I can select whether I want to save these current settings for new scenarios. So this will be my new default if I choose to select this. And I could also bring in previous default information if I like using this button. We'll go to the next page, and the base expenses that they've requested in their retirement was $78,000 a year. Anywhere there's a question mark, I can hover my mouse over that to see that more information about those fields. In this case, we just have base expense information. We don't have any additional expenses, which would have to do with things that are maybe lump sum expenses in future years, like travel or cars, things that you wanted to track outside of the regular base expenses. So in this plan, we're not going to enter any of those. So I can just move ahead to the income page. So for Monika, she has employment income of $90,000 a year. And we're going to index that with general inflation. So I can just delete that 0%, and you can see it says general inflation now. And so that's what's going to be used. The general inflation is my setting that I had set up, remember, back on the general page. So it's going to be using 2.1% in this case, but if I ever change the general inflation, it would fluctuate with that change on the general page. So I have my employment as the type of income. It is taxable, it's RSP eligible, and it's starting from the first year of the projection, so I can leave that blank, and it's going to the age of 64. If I click on the settings, I can see that it's going to the end of the year that she turned 64, so I could adjust this date to be more precise if I wished. I can go ahead and add her pension, and in this case, it's $60,000 starting at age 65, so I can say 65,000. No, 60,000 starting at age 65 at 80% survivor benefit and 2.1% indexing. And I can switch over at the top here to Eric. So Eric will now look at his incomes. Again, employment income is entered just as a default for me. I could just update the amount for him, which is $80,000. Also index at general inflation. And now we're on to the assets page. So we're quickly moving through these pages, and we're going to take a look here at this default, the default non-registered asset that's added for you in the plan. So this is here because we want to make sure that there's sort of like a bucket in the future. If we ever need to add money to an account, we want to at least have something available. So we kind of start you off with an asset. I'm going to go ahead and add more assets, so I'll just delete that one for now, but we're going to say this is maybe a future non-reg account. Right now there's nothing in it, and I can choose from the list to say that it's non-registered, and it will be 40% fixed income and 60% equity. So my total rate of return here is 3.8%. I'm going to add a next asset, so I'm going to pay attention to whose page I'm on here. So I have the information actually listed in terms of Monika first. So I'm going to switch over to Monika. This is just warning me that I haven't filled out that second row. I can proceed, and that just means that that second row will be deleted. I'm going to delete this as well, her Monika's non-registered joint or non-registered asset that was there by default. So I'll go ahead and add her other accounts. So she has an RSP that is $20,000. And I will just start typing R to get RSP to start coming up there. And again, that's a 40%, 60% split. And then I'll add another capital asset, and this is going to be the FHSA. And right now there's nothing in that account. And again, I can choose from the list. So this is FHSA, and we'll say this is 100% fixed income. And that's all the capital assets for her, but we do also have a house. So I'm going to add that in. They're going to purchase this in the future, and the cost of that is going to be $525,000, and future purchase age is 38 years old. And again, I can just check when that's happening. So it's the end of the year she turns 38. We're going to select that it's a joint asset and there's no capital gain tax. So I can come back up to the capital assets section at the top, and you can see that we were on the assets tab. That's where we're entering the information like this. Next, I can select the TFSA tab, and I could enter any TFSA contribution room. So in this case, we do have some information that she has $90,000 of room. She's never had a TFSA, and based on her age, that's how much room she could have for contributions. For her RSP information, she has $40,000 of room, and she also has a pension adjustment, $15,000. And what this is going to do is reduce her RSP room every year, just the room that she has available. So if we have the software making automatic RSP contributions, this is important so that it will limit how much she'd be allowed to contribute. We have the RSP information in this table that we're going to convert it to a RIF at age 71, and we'll just leave that as the default. She doesn't have a DCPP, but we do have the FHSA in the plan. So in this instance, they don't have the FHSA open yet. So she's currently turning age 32 this year. So if I adjust that to 32 and then click away from that cell, we can see that we no longer have the option to enter any carry forward room because it knows that it's being created in 2024. There are no lifetime contributions because this is the first year it's open, and we'll select that it's linked to the house. Employer matching would be used if we had any group RSPs, for example, so we could do an employee and employer contribution. In this case, we just know that Eric is going to be contributing $12,000 a year to his RSP, so I won't need to use the employer matching for him. And I'll show you how to go ahead and enter those contributions directly on the planning page because they're dollar value amounts as opposed to percentages. So if I do want to switch over to Eric, I just come back up to the top and I click his name. And then here we've got his assets. So remember, I'd put in this future non-registered account. I will say that it's joint. So if I flip back to Monika, we're going to see that also in her list. Because Eric does have RSP and FHSA, I'm going to use this little shortcut over here where I can either move an asset to the other spouse if I've maybe put it on the wrong page, or I could copy. So I'll choose to copy this RSP and also copy the FHSA. This is just copying the information that's under the assets page. So I switch back to Eric. Now we have more assets for him. We have that future non-registered, his RSP. I just need to change the amount now. So his RSP is 40,000. And we'll then update the contribution room for him for 90,000. For his RSP, let's see, we've got 50,000. And the FHSA is also going to start at his age 32 with no carry forward room or contributions, and that it's linked to the house. So if they had opened this FHSA last year, we could have left the age as 31 and then entered in if they hadn't made a contribution last year, so there'd be $8,000 contribution room carried forward, or perhaps they had made an $8,000 contribution and we would indicate that here. And we want to know this information so that the software can limit the contributions over their lifetime, and also be aware of when this account needs to be closed. All of these question marks, again, will help you with additional information that you might be looking for. Okay, let's next move to the debt section. And here we have a mortgage for the new home that they're going to purchase. And it's going to be a future dated mortgage for $450,000. It's going to be 5% interest rate, and the future start age will be age 38. Remember how we were setting up the purchase of the real asset at the end of the year? They turn 38. So I want to double check that this mortgage is also starting at the end of the year. This warning comes up because we want to warn you that you don't need to add a date in here unless it really is a future loan. I will just say okay to that because I do want that money to come in the future. Sometimes what can happen is you could enter the current year thinking that, you know, this is an existing mortgage, so you'll put in the current year. But if you do that, it will actually bring an influx of cash into the projections on that date. And so that's not what you want if it's an existing mortgage. So make sure to leave it blank if they already are making payments. This is going to be interest and principal, monthly amount of $2,600. It's a joint loan, not tax deductible, and it's against the house, which means that if we sell the house in the projections, SNAP can use the money from the sale to pay off any remaining debt. Next, we have government benefits. Starting at age 65, we're going to use the national average as they indicated on the questionnaire, which is 55% of the maximum CPP is the average across Canada. Old age security will receive 100%, and then I can check for Monika and we'll keep the same thing for her. I'm going to skip over the bottom sections here. We don't really need to add any information for these sections today. So I can go right ahead and move over to the planning page. Now remember, there was a few additional things that what we wanted to add for Eric. So you can see on the planning page, we have a combined view. We have a view for Monika and a view for Eric. I want to go to Eric's planning page right now because we want to enter his RSP contributions. So we'll just skip over to the capital assets and I will talk a little bit more about this page in general in a moment, but we're going to first put in his $12,000 contributions. And this is turning yellow in the background of the cell here. And this is indicating that we've just entered what we call an override. So anywhere that you click on a blue value or a purple value on this page, you can get a pop-up window that allows you to make an edit. So I've put in that he wants to save $12,000 a year. I can choose how many years that's applicable for. I could index it if I wish to. And then if I've put something in that I wanted to take away later, I would be using the clear override checkbox to remove those contributions that I'd entered. So we color them in yellow just to indicate for you to note that this is a value that you entered as opposed to something that was automatically generated. As it's turned yellow, I would need to recalculate this plan to finalize that input. So at the top of the page, I can see a hint here. It's telling me that the scenario has been changed and to rerun it. We also provide a hint in that the run scenario button turns red and it's usually green when everything is updated. So if I click that button, we're going to be updating the scenario. It turns back to green. And now we can see that those contributions will be increasing the value of the account. Another thing to note is that I can hover my mouse over that cell and I can see more information about it. So for example, for RSPs, I can see what the contribution room is. I can see the year and I can see the age of the person. Once it turns to an RSP, I can see that it is an RSP and what the minimum room, or sorry, the minimum RIF income would be. So here at 65, it's still considered an RSP, which is why it only tells me the room. But if I scroll down to age 72, now I can see what the minimum withdrawals would be, and that it is taking the minimum in this case. All right, let's go back to the FHSA and enter the contributions. They have a little bit of a unique schedule here. They're planning to put in $5,000 a year for the first 4 years, so until age 35, and then they want to maximize that FHSA with $8,000 a year after that point. And I think I might have forgotten to link. Let's see if I did. I'm gonna run this scenario. We want to make sure that oh yeah, so I did link it to the house. So what it knows here is that These dashes are coming up because the account's been closed after the house has been purchased. So remember, back on the FHSA settings page, I had linked to the house, so it knows that this purchase of the house, his half of the house is the $262,000, and we're automatically using this FHSA. It's withdrawing money automatically to cover some of that house purchase. We can also see that the loan starts in that year and that his portion of the loan payments are being taken care of as well. So I just need to do the same thing back on Monika's page. And again, I'll scroll over to her FHSA and do the same contributions. So $5,000 till she's 38. Or actually till she was 35. So that's okay, I made a mistake. I know that the first 4 years need to be $5,000, and after that it's going to be $8,000. So I will copy that down. And when I run this scenario, it's going to correct it for me to what it believes is the maximum allowed based on the information that we provided earlier. So it knows that this was the first year that the FHSA was in place. These are all the contributions they're planning on making. And so it limited the final year contribution. It weren't allowed to make the $8,000 contribution that we tried to do. It's limiting it to the $4,000 so that the total contribution over the lifetime is $40,000. It's making that qualifying withdrawal automatically. And there's also this column for the non-qualifying withdrawal. So if they didn't purchase the house, SNAP will know that at some point, I think it's 15 years, that the FHSA needs to be closed, and it will make this non-qualifying withdrawal automatically at that point. So we do have a webinar, we have a video about this, but we also have an article all about it. And I'll just show you that quickly. I forgot to show you when we first came to this page. I go to the help up at the top right, and then I can go to the help center. I can also choose instant answers. So that just gives me instant answers here on this page. I could type in, for example, FHSA and enter, and then here is the article all about that. If I click the name of it, it will open it. And then if I click the name of it again, I see it in our knowledge base. So up here we have the support phone number you can reach us at, as well as contact forms. You could fill this out and it will send us an email, and we'll get back to you. Pretty much 80% of the time we're getting back to people within even just an hour, but within 2 hours, most likely. The webinar section is a great place to see what's coming up. So we have webinars that would be coming up. Here's our live support sessions section that I was talking about earlier, where you can register for upcoming sessions. Okay, so I'll just back out of here and go back to our plan. To get directly to the help center, you can just use that first option in this menu as well. So the biggest question obviously is, how does this look for a retirement? Do they have enough money to reach their retirement as they wished for $78,000 a year in retirement? And we've entered their planned savings. We've entered their house purchase. And so now we can take a look at the combined page. So I'm just moving to the combined planning page. And we'll talk a little bit about this page in general in a moment, but the first thing I'm going to do is just scroll down to the bottom, because if they're running out of money, we're going to start seeing we call a shortfall in the plan, where they're having to borrow money in order to maintain the spending. There are no years where there's a shortfall at this point. I know there's a lot of numbers on this page, so there's a couple quick ways that you can see the final result here. One is using this balance column, the estate before tax. I can click the blue icon at the top of that column and just see right away the information about the estate summary. So in this future year, how much money is left in their capital assets, their real assets, their house has grown to that amount, total assets, and if there's any debts or insurance and so on. In this case, there's some taxes owing because they still have some registered money. What would that future estate after tax be? And then if we brought that back into today's dollars, what would that be worth today? So they do have money left at the end of these projections. Going back up to the beginning of the plan, or just talk a little bit about the cash flow here. So we know that while they're working, they knew how much they were saving. And so we didn't enter any base expense value as a target until they retired. So as I scroll down, I can see that at retirement, at age 65, we have that $78,000 a year target. But before that, these values are not blue, so they're not editable. And what this is telling me is that we're in the manual cash flow management section of the projections. So the manual section means you would be responsible to enter any contributions or withdrawals from the assets, that those are not happening automatically based on a target base expense. Instead, Snap will show you how much money is left over at the end of the year after any debt payments are made, contributions to assets are made, and taxes. So they are living on right now about $111,000 a year. And we can see that that number drops down a bit once they start having mortgage payments. And it will go up a little bit over time. And the reason there is that we haven't indexed the RSP contributions, but we have indexed the employment income. So we can see here the total income is going up over time, but their expenses over here for the RSP contributions, that's staying the same. So that's why it looks like they have more money over time. We could index those RSP contributions if we wished. We were just being conservative and that we're just keeping it constant. All of these sections on the combined page can be expanded or collapsed. So we have these arrows at the top of the sections. If I click that arrow, that means that I'm expanding it. And now I can hover my mouse over the column title. You can see that Monica's employment income is this column, and then Eric's employment income is this column. We have pension income here with, in this case, there's nothing really to expand. So it's just the one pension. It's the total pension of $60,000 starting at Monica's age 65. We have benefits. So what are these? If I expand this, government benefits, both CPP and OAS. We have the taxes. If I expand that, we'll have the total taxable income visible and CPP and EI deductions, and then the total taxes. Wherever there's these blue menu items, will open up into a into a taxable income details table or a tax table or whatever column that you're on. It will open up more information. Then we have the capital assets section, and this one is very handy. If I expand it, I can then see all of the capital assets, and again, hover my mouse over the name and I'll then see whose asset that is. I'm not able to make any edits on the combined page, but I can see the contributions and that they were entered as an override in this case. So if I close that up, it's helpful to see the summary, and we see all types of accounts. So what's the total value, and then what are the total contributions? Then we have the house, the real assets. So the house starts off at $525,000 and grows over time. We have the mortgage that's going to start in that future year, and how much money are they paying? So when it's a negative value, that's how much they received. So that was that future loan. And then when it's positive, it's how much they're paying. And we have the net worth, and these values are blue. We can click on any given year and open up more information about the net worth, and then open up more information about the estate as well. So this, any given year, we can get this table about that estate if they were to pass away at the end of that year. To show this information to a client, we can use the charts. So this is a section here that you can access right from the planning page or from the report. We have the capital outflows chart. These are interactive charts. So for example, where I have this big spike, and that's where we purchased the house. That's the outflow of cash for the house. I can deselect that in the legend, and that will expand out the other items in the chart just to make it easier to read. I can hover my mouse over different items, and then those would be highlighted in the chart below. The cash inflows chart, very similar. This one is really helpful for talking about retirement income. So for example, I can deselect all of the items and start from a blank chart, and we could chat with our clients about before retirement, here's where your income's coming from. Once you retire, you can expect a pension. Your OAS and CPP will layer on top of that. And where will you kind of make up the difference? we're going to be starting to bring in the other assets that they have. So here's some registered money and then non-registered money. Once I select this other, that's the loan that they're taking. So I could choose to just exclude that if I wish. And then we can also see the tax situation each year, and that will help us even out the taxes if we would like to go back to the plan and maybe alter the order of withdrawals, or just take a look at what's happening in more detail on the planning page. And we have the net worth. So we can see that at the end of the projections, they have grown some non-registered money. So it was good that we'd added that account at the beginning of the plan for future non-registered money, but also we could enter a TFSA at this point if we wanted to also save any additional surpluses into that account as opposed to a non-registered account. So Snap's not doing that right now because we did not add a TFSA to the projections. So let's go back to, and each of these pages, each of these charts could be viewed in full screen as well. If we come back to the recommendations section, so this is another area will help you just get some more information for your clients. You don't actually have to apply this to your plan, but it just gives you a good starting point of something to talk about. So we can see here that their retirement spending goal is $78,000 a year, that right now they're overfunded. So we saw that they had money left at the end of the plan. So there's a surplus of cash. And so maybe the clients would like to know something about, well, could I retire earlier? Or how much more could I spend, which is sustainable spending? How much could I spend right now from my savings? Or if I took some money out of an account right now, what would that be? And so you can use the calculate button on each of these just to find out those answers. And then you also have the option to apply that to the plan or not. So in this case, if they were to retire, it will help us find out here what age they could retire so that they could still, they would just basically be using up all of their capital assets by the end of the projection. So it's 1 year earlier. If they retired, they would still be okay until the age 100. Sustainable spending will give us the value instead of spending $78,000 a year, maybe how much more could they spend. So we'll take a look at what that value is, and then we can choose whether to apply it or not. So they could spend $82,000 a year. So we can choose to copy this scenario before we apply this. So what will happen here is we'll have a new version of this scenario where they'll spend more in retirement in order to deplete their capital assets by the end of the plan. So if I come and look at the estate before tax now in the final year, you can see that it's depleted everything in their capital assets. So their final estate is going to be worth less. I could compare that with my first scenario and see the difference. So they used to have 896,000 in their capital assets. Now it's basically nothing. So this allows you to take a look at a comparison in the final estate. You could also compare in any given year. So you can select that year and then see now we're in 2036 because that's the value of the year that I chose, and we can compare. So this is also very helpful to compare not just at the very end of the projections, but in any given year where you just select the value in that year and you'll be able to do that comparison. So the final spot here is the client report, and from the report you can create a PDF which will then be available to send to your clients. You can sit with them and work through the different pages as well. So on the left hand side we have our navigator, so we can switch through to different pages. We can enter information about maybe there's certain information that you typically share as goals and objectives and you would just like to edit it slightly for each client. So you could set up a template and then save that current page as your template. We have our assumptions listed for these projections, such as what inflation you used, what the retirement age was, government benefit information, asset rates of return, and so on. Then we have the charts. We did talk about the charts already. So these are exactly the same charts. And again, they are also interactive here on this report editor view, which is the one I'm on right now. If I deselect the other outflows and total inflow, capital assets in this case means it's an outflow to the capital asset. So it's savings to capital assets. Once I've made my adjustments, if I go to the report preview page, this will be showing me what the report is going to look like, and I won't be able to make any further edits on this page. It's just a preview of what the report is going to look like. Another section that is helpful, talked about the cash inflows page, but another popular page is what we call the, scroll down here, the cash flow summary, which gives you all the details about the expenses that they're planning, like what's their spending, what their income levels are, and tax situation, and where the money is going to be coming from or going to in the projections. So this is the client report. And next, I wanted to talk about randomized scenarios. So right now we have, if I come back to the planning page, we have this plan. We have two plans. So we have one that's called sustainable spending. And if I use my menu at the top here, I could switch the scenario back to my scenario 1 here, which is the baseline projection. So the baseline projection was the one where they wanted to spend $78,000 a year, and they still had some money left at the end of the projections. So this is working potentially well for them. This is showing that they can meet their goal. We also now could take a look and say, well, what if the rate of return that you were expecting that we used in this plan? So remember, we used 3.8% overall rate of return, which was 40% fixed income and 60% equity. So the average rate of return for this projection was 3.8% as a constant rate of return throughout the projections for all of the accounts, except for the FHSA, which they spent before they retired anyway. If we'd like to run a randomized scenario, I can choose this arrow beside run scenario and then run randomized scenario. So this one is going to open for me a randomized scenario pop-up page. So this is a chart that's going to show me average annual rates of return for the entire projection period out of, there's going to be 101 options. So we have a slider here. It's run 101 randomized sequences. I can use this chart. I can see this goes for the length of the projections. So from now until 2090. And I can see $1,000 starting at currently. How much would that end up being by the end of the projections? Now, the slider here will adjust this average annual rate of return. So if I move the slider around and update this chart, we can see as we go lower, the average annual rate of return for the entire projection period is decreasing. We're seeing variability in the rates of the return because of every year there's going to be different rates of return. We're seeing how the sequence of returns could impact the projections based on the overall average rate of return being decreased. So remember, in our plan, we had 3.8% average rate of return. So now I'm at position 27 right now, and I'm at 2.97%. But this chart is based on a 10% cash, 40% fixed income, and 50% equity mix. In ours, we had 40% fixed income and 60% equity. So we can actually make that change. And this is not changing anything in my projection. This is just going to be changing this chart. So I want to change this to 40%, and then we have 60% equities. And so I'll just update this, and we'll see that at position 27, based on that new asset mix, we have actually 3.27% nominal rate of return for the length of the projections on average. So if I wanted to decrease my nominal rate of return, let's say by 1%, from 3.8 to 2.8, I can just move this slider down. And here we are at position 17 with a 2.8% nominal return. So I can update this, and every time I update, you can see that it's a new sequence of rates on this chart, because there's 101 different cases from 0 to 100. And I'm at position 17 right now, which means that I've introduced both variability into the rates and also I've reduced my average rate of return in the nominal dollar rate of return to 2.8%. Okay, so now I can apply that to my projection. Just have to click apply and run. And it will actually apply this to my scenario. So one thing that I forgot to mention was it's a good idea to copy your scenario first so that you can have something to compare back to. Okay, so in this case, I've forgotten to copy it, but I'll show you how to get around that. We can see here the rates of return are changing every year. This is that randomized sequence. And if I come down to the bottom, it looks like they're not running out of money. I'm on the combined page right now, and I can scroll over to the right and take a look at their final year's estate. So they have 521,000 left in this version, whereas again, I don't have the other one to compare to because I overwrote it. So let's reverse that right now. So all I need to do to reverse it is come back up here, choose randomized scenario again, and I'm going to say clear and run. So that's going to take away my randomized rates and put back my straight rates of return. So then I'm going to come to the top and I'm going to choose to copy the scenario. So now we'll have the baseline, which is scenario 1, and then we'll have this new one, which is, we can call it scenario 2 randomized. All right, so on the randomized one, we'll make this randomized scenario selection again. So I will have to update back to 0% cash, 40% fixed income, and 60% equities. Then I can adjust the slider again to try to get to about a 1% lower rate of return, nominal rate of return. Or sometimes what people do is they'll just always decide to choose position 20, for example. So it's approximately 1% lower, a little bit less than that, but let's update that and we can see where the sequence of returns makes a big difference is, what if they receive most of the growth, like most of the higher rates of return at the end of the projections, and then they won't really be able to take advantage of that because they might have spent most of their money before those higher rates come into play. But we'll try this position 20. We'll apply and run to the projection that we've got behind it. All right, so if I just quickly jump up to the estate before tax and take a look. And so in this case, they've actually run out of capital assets and they had to incur debt in order to maintain that level of spending. So if I scroll down, we can start seeing those pink lines, which I'd mentioned earlier, representing a shortfall. And each year's shortfall is shown under this net cash flow column. And then Snap is borrowing money for them, and that's being tracked under the cash balance column. So they would have had to borrow almost $1.7 million in order to maintain their spending of $78,000 a year. So a little bit of information just to remind you about, let's come out of the full screen here. And just to remind you about what we're doing with the stress testing. So there's two important aspects to consider when we're stress testing. So first is the average annual return, and then the second is the sequence of the returns. So we're using randomized scenarios to illustrate both of these considerations. So there's 101 randomly generated sequences. We're moving the position on the slider by selecting position 20, so the 20th worst average real rate of return out of these 101 sequences. It's representing about 1% less nominal rate of return. So position 20 on the slider represents the 20th worst case in terms of the average annual real rate of return for the entire projection period. But remember, the average, just because the average real rate of return maybe is higher in one sequence here of the randomly generated sequences, it doesn't mean that's going to be better necessarily, because it depends on that sequence, like where do the higher returns happen. But by using this randomized scenario, we've introduced both variability and reduced the average rate of return. So a couple important notes: that you don't want to use a stress tested scenario to replace your base financial projection. So you want to use that base projection, which is the one that has the consistent rates of inflation and investment returns. So you want to use that for strategic decisions such as when to retire or whether to commute a pension, using those recommendations that we talked about earlier. And therefore, you would make a copy of your base projection first before you performed any stress testing. And as you saw, sometimes you can forget to do that, but you can just reverse it by clearing those rates as well. So back to our randomized scenario. Remember that you can go to the Help Center, and we have a whole article about randomized scenarios and stress testing. So there's stress testing in general includes both randomized and historical scenarios. Both of these are part of the stress testing add-on, which is an additional fee for your monthly subscription. It's $9 a month on the monthly plan, or $96 a year for the annual plan. You can turn it on and turn it off at any point, activate, deactivate it, and we'll prorate your payments. But this will guide you to a lot more information about using both randomized and historical. So there's a lot of information. Today I just went through one of the use cases. Again, it was using randomized scenario to choose position 20 on the slider, or approximately 1% less overall nominal rate of return. So again, I could move it lower if I wanted to get closer to the 2.8%. So here we're at position 15. Can update this, and then we can see in this case, especially like the gains are later in the projection. So I'd expect potentially even a worse result in this case. Let's take a look at what happened. So this was age 81 that the shortfall was starting. And in this new one, if I scroll down, okay, so I was wrong. In this one, they actually have enough money to get to the end of the projections. So there, the rate of return on average was lower, but they ended up with still having $1 million in their account at the end. So you can see that that sequence of return really does make a huge difference. I think that was all that I wanted to chat about today. So I haven't seen any questions come in over the time that I've been speaking, but please make sure to give us a call or send us an email. Again, you can send us the email if you come right here to Instant Answers and ask. Here, if you send us a question, we'll be able to get back to you as soon as we can. So hopefully we'll see you again at the next session. And thanks so much for joining today. We really appreciate it.